Whew. Okay, so now for step 7, we need to assess the effects of the rhetoric. So we spent a fair amount of time observing the text, the rhetorical text, dissecting it a bit, analyzing the textual information, analyzing the imagery, analyzing any allusions or metaphors that we can take from the text itself. Can we find things outside of the text from the context, what's happening in the world during this time when the writer decided to speak and say something. And now we also defined the rhetorical situation. We identified the artistic proofs, the ethos, logos, and pathos. And now we need to say, and what's it all mean? So in this step, you need to pull together your observations and your notes and then see if you can draw some meaning out of it. So to like go full circle here, the whole point of rhetoric is to persuade. So it's that art of persuasion. What have you been persuaded to do? And so you could be persuaded to take action, which is why in our next step in this assessment, I've asked you to look into a commercial. A commercial very explicitly has a call to action at the end of it, right? Like, buy some Coke. You want to sit with the cool kids, buy some Coca-Cola, drink Coca-Cola because that's going to make you cool. In terms of this speech, what was President Bush looking for from the American public? So was he looking for, did anything change, or was there a reinforcement of the status quo? And did it move people to take action? So did that rhetorical audience, did they have what they needed to take action? So we asked the questions, why does it matter? And why is it important that people view, receive, read this text? How might it influence the public? Does it reinforce the status quo? What ideas are mentioned or what are absent? And so I have mentioned several times that it's important that people in that moment saw that speech because it defined what had happened that day. And so there were so many lives lost. So many people had no idea what was happening, that in that moment it was a extremely important text. For us to look back historically, it's also important so that we can make sense of past mistakes and perhaps try to not repeat them. The country was mourning the attacks, didn't really understand the cause. People were also scared, so maybe the speech helped to alleviate some concern. They needed to be assured that there wasn't imminent danger, so that we weren't going to wake up and there was going to be more attacks the next day. I will tell you that as somebody living in Boston, it was very weird to wake up the next day. There were no planes in the sky, very little traffic. It was a very strange time to be located in one of the largest metropolitan cities on the East Coast. The government's administration was concerned about a secondary economic collapse, which we pointed to earlier as a result, as we've recently seen with the COVID pandemic, that when people get scared, the economy reacts to that. So that was another intention, I think, of the rhetoric. The speech in some ways does really reinforce the status quo. I mean, there's so many of those American ideals mentioned, as well as Judeo-Christian ideals, and then in other ways, perhaps it asks people to respond to tomorrow in different ways. And so very much in the way that people get into patterns of just living their lives, the speech the President Bush did ask people to be kind of nice and kind to each other over the coming days. And I think, as someone who lived through the time, that really did occur. I mean, people were doing very similar things to what we're doing now within this moment, checking on neighbors, making sure people are okay, helping each other kind of pick up some pieces. And then there's so many things that are present in this speech, but there's some things that are absent. There's this intentional look at those those people will pay, you know? And so that's a pretty strong idea, but very limited in the amount of text it had within the speech. And so as an audience, we kind of have to draw some conclusions about who them are. And it maybe wasn't exactly clear at that moment, but you definitely heard it was an us versus them. And so who are them? Can we define them? And who do you think them are? We know that now that this is a terrorist attack. It defines terrorism for the American people. We now also understand, while we may have heard the words terrorism before, it wasn't something that was happened here in the United States. And so we've heard of terrorist attacks in Europe and, you know, in Ireland and in England and stuff. And so now this was something that was defined for the American people. So we understand that these are people who destroy buildings and families and potentially economies. But where are those people and what do those people look like? Those were important questions that maybe were absent but present. I don't know. Is there anything else that you take away from this speech? And if there was, this would be the moment to say that. So I'm going to close this step off by just, there's just reacting a little bit to what's underneath here. So for this last step, just talking a little bit about this assessment here. And, you know, actually, I'm going to close this video off and I'm going to start again in there in case anybody skips over everything. So we get a quick look at the Unit 3 assessment for chapters 10 and 11. I'll see you in a minute.